At the bottom of a well, beneath the roots of a tree so vast its branches hold up the sky, there is an eye, pale, intact, staring upward through dark water at a surface it can no longer see. It's been there a long time. Something placed it there willingly, and something received it in a transaction that went exactly as agreed and still somehow went wrong. Somewhere above the water, a god is kneeling at the well's edge. He's come here knowing what this costs. He knows exactly what he'll gain, and he's about to reach toward his own face. His name was Odin, chief of the Aesir, ruler of Asgard, father of the slain and the living alike. And he was kneeling in the dark at the edge of a well that had no bottom anyone living had ever seen. Mimir crouched across from him, the wisest being in all the 9 worlds, keeper of this place, ancient beyond reckoning, his body so saturated with the well's knowledge that his eyes had the flat, depthless look of someone who has already seen your question and your question after that. He looked at Odin and named the price without ceremony. 1 eye, freely given, dropped into the water below, gone. Everyone who knows this story will tell you Odin accepted because he was wise, because a great king understands that wisdom costs something, and he paid what was asked with the calm authority of someone who'd already weighed the transaction and found it fair. But look at what actually drove him to this well. It wasn't the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. It was something older and more desperate than that. The inability to tolerate not knowing. The future existed, vast and sealed, and Odin could feel it pressing against him from the other side of a wall he couldn't see through. That feeling, that particular terror, had brought him to his knees in the dark. You know this feeling. Maybe not at this scale, but you know what it is to lie awake running the numbers on something you can't control. A diagnosis, a conversation you know is coming, the slow math of whether someone is leaving. The desperate logic that says if I could just see it clearly enough, I could survive it. That's what brought Odin to the well. He pressed his fingers to his own face, found the socket, and removed the eye. Not quickly, not with the clean certainty of a god performing a noble act. He had to choose it in the specific physical sense of that word. The hand moving, the resistance, the sound it made when it finally came free. Then the small weight of it in his palm, the pale iris still catching the last light from above, before he opened his fingers and let it drop. The sound it made hitting the water was very small, and then it was gone, falling down through the dark toward the well's floor, where it still rests. Mimir held out the water. Odin drank, and the veil came down. Every hidden thing rose up at once, and Odin saw all of it. He saw the shape of time from one end to the other. He'd paid. The knowledge was his. What does a god see when he finally tears the veil off the future? It came all at once, not in sequence, not in the orderly way that time is supposed to work, one moment following another so you can breathe between them. The knowledge arrived as a single wave, everything that would ever happen compressed into one unbearable instant. He saw Baldr fall. Baldr, his son, the most beloved thing in all the 9 worlds, whose death Odin had believed, had needed to believe, might somehow be avoidable. He saw the face of the one who would guide the fatal dart. He saw the grief on Frigg's face. He saw a jaw unhinging wide enough to swallow a god whole. He saw his own death. He saw the sky folding. He saw everything, every face he'd ever loved, every name that had ever mattered, arranged in the precise order of their ending. And he couldn't look away, because you can't unknow a thing. The well had shown him exactly what he asked for. That was the price beneath the price. Sit with that for a moment. One-eyed, alone, sitting somewhere between the roots of the world, with the weight of all of it pressing down on him like stone. The knowledge you asked for delivered in full, and it's worse than anything the not knowing ever was. He'd gone to the well desperate to outrun uncertainty. What he carried back was worse than uncertainty. Uncertainty, at least, leaves room for hope. Whether driven by that vision or a thirst for something, anything, that might yet change the shape of what he'd seen, he went further. Yggdrasil at night isn't a comforting thing. The branches hold up the sky, but from below, hanging from them, you feel only the void. The darkness beneath the roots stretching down further than the eye can follow, even an eye that has seen everything. Odin hung himself from the world tree, pierced his own side with his own spear. No food, no water. 9 days and 9 nights, turning slowly in the dark. This wasn't ritual. This wasn't wisdom-seeking in any form a sane mind would recognize. This was a man who'd been told his family would die and couldn't stop reaching for something that might change what he already knew to be true. On the 9th night, the runes came. They didn't arrive gently. They tore themselves into existence out of the darkness below him. Ancient symbols of power and fate rising like a scream from somewhere deeper than the roots. He screamed back. And in that moment, hanging half dead above the void, bleeding and starving and alone, Odin seized them. The runes, symbols woven into the fabric of fate itself, tools of binding and breaking, of revelation and concealment. They couldn't change a single word of the story already written. So he built something. That's what you do when you can't change the ending. You prepare for it, because preparing feels like acting, and acting feels like control. Odin built Valhalla, a hall so vast its ceiling disappeared into smoke. Its rafters hung with shields, its benches packed with the bodies of dead warriors who rose every morning, fought until they bled, then rose again at dusk to eat and drink and wait. The Valkyries rode the battlefields of men, choosing, and carried the fallen back to fill his hall with soldiers for a war whose outcome he already knew. He watched them from his high seat and counted, and the number was never enough. And he knew it would never be enough, and he kept counting. I think that's the part of this story that gets under my skin the most, if I'm honest. Not the eye, not the hanging, but the counting. The image of someone performing the same ritual every day, knowing it isn't enough. Unable to stop because stopping would mean sitting still with everything they know. When a rival tribe of gods called the Vanir sent the severed head of Mimir back to Asgard, a bloody insult after a hostage exchange collapsed between the two factions, most gods would have buried it. Odin preserved it with herbs and magic, kept it close, and spoke to it in the dark. Think about that. He talked to a severed head. Not because he'd lost his mind, though I'm not sure the distinction matters at that point. He did it because Mimir was the only being who had ever understood the weight of what the well contained. The only witness to what Odin had paid and what he'd received. Everyone else saw a king with power and foresight. Mimir had watched the eye drop. You know this feeling too, even if your version is smaller. The loneliness of carrying something you can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. The thing you know that would change the room if you said it out loud, so you don't, and the silence gets heavier every year. Odin found one creature who could hold it with him, and when that creature was killed, he kept the head and talked to it anyway. There was no one else. And then Baldr died. Odin's son, the one the entire 9 worlds loved, the one even his enemies would have spared, fell with a dart of mistletoe through his chest, guided by Loki's hand. Loki, the one who'd always stood at the edge of the feast, smiling, finding the gap in every protection. Odin had seen Loki's hand on the dart, had seen Baldr's face, had watched this exact moment arrive from years away, the way you watch a storm cross an open plain toward a house you can't move. He didn't cry out when it happened. What would be the point? He'd already grieved this. He'd grieved it the moment the well gave him back the future, before Baldr had drawn a single breath of that doomed air. Foreknowledge doesn't spare you the grief. It only makes you live it twice. When Ragnarök came, it looked exactly the way he'd always known it would. The world finally catching up to what had lived inside him for so long. The vision completing itself, stepping from the interior dark into the light where everyone else could finally see it too. He rode to the well anyway. Not for answers. He had all the answers, every sequence, every face, every ending, and had carried them since the moment the water touched his lips. He rode because there was only one being left in the 9 worlds who understood what it had been to carry all of it. The head of Mimir floated in the torchlight the way it always had, pale, still. Odin knelt at the edge one final time. What passed between them, the old sources don't say. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe everything that needed saying had been said years ago in one of those late conversations in the dark, and this was just the last time. Then he rode into the battle. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, bound since before the age of men, prophesied and, inevitable, opened his jaw. Odin rode into it. The jaw closed. That was the end of him. Here is what I've been sitting with since the beginning of this story. When Odin knelt at the well, the first time, the real time, he didn't know precisely what he was buying. He knew the price. He'd felt the cold of the water, the weight of what Mimir required. But the shape of what the wisdom would contain, the exact contour of the grief it would install, he couldn't have known that until it was already inside him. And he bought it anyway, because the uncertainty was worse. Because not knowing, being a god who couldn't see, was more unbearable than anything the knowing might contain. I don't think that was wisdom. I don't think it was hubris exactly either. I think it was simply the oldest, most human thing there is. The belief that if you could only see clearly enough, far enough, you'd find the place where the pain stops. The place where knowing becomes controlling. Where the future, once visible, becomes something you can hold. There is no such place. The eye is still there. It's been there since long before any of this ended. Pale, intact, looking up at a surface it'll never see again. It purchased exactly what it purchased. It's still paying exactly what it cost.